as well. Joining me now is Georgia Congressman Hank Johnson, a member of the Judiciary Committee. Mr. Johnson, thank you so much for joining us here this morning. Let me start off by asking you about today's executive order. What do you think your constituents, want and need to hear from the president as he signs that executive order?
Well, I don't think my constituents are looking to hear anything from this president. Anything that he says lacks credibility. He lies so often that you can't believe anything that he says. And so nobody in my district is particularly keen on, awaiting this executive order. And I can guarantee you that it's going to be beyond his authority to impose certain measures on state and local law enforcement. He can have impact on federal law enforcement, but on the streets, the big problem in inner city America is local and state police officers, and he won't be able to deal with that. But this this federal registry that we heard might be in this executive order is certainly a good step. That is a part of the legislation that the House is marking up tomorrow in Judiciary Committee. A federal registry would be created that would keep track of these citizen complaints against police officers, and it would be available, that database would be available to the public. And that's going to be very important. So the president is jumping out, kind of stealing thunder that he knows is coming. And this is typical for President Trump.
So do you believe that any of the measures, from what the reporting suggests so far, as our correspondent there was just suggesting, is expected to be announced, do you believe any of it could help prevent the excessive use of force by police in this country?
Well, the president can't issue edicts with executive orders. That is legislative work that we're doing, that he's trying to take credit for in advance of us doing it. And he may oppose us as we're doing it. That's what I expect. But the bottom line is Congress has to go to work and approve the legislation, authorize the funding, and actually appropriate the money for the establishment of the federal registry that he's going to announce this morning in his executive order. This is a political stunt, really, that the president is doing this morning, trying to get out in front of what Congress is going to do tomorrow.
Let me turn back to Georgia for a moment, if I can. What still needs to happen for people to find justice and healing around the tragic death of Rayshard Brooks? I mean, you heard the mayor of Atlanta there say we don't have another hour to spare, because they had been waiting for some weeks for suggestions in terms of reforms. They lost another citizen of that city.
Yeah, the police chief resigning in Atlanta was a good first step. It indicates a knowledge that there's a need for change at the top. And the top civilian official in Atlanta, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, is taking full charge of what happens as we move forward with the police department. And she wants to see some changes made immediately. And so all of that, government does not operate on a dime where you can turn it on a dime. It's kind of like a big giant ship, and it has to be steered in the right direction. And change is going to take time, but change has come. It's time for legislation that mandates that change, and it's time for funding that mandates that change also, or a reallocation of funding to make public safety more of a reality in black neighborhoods across this country. We're not criminals who have to be occupied and subdued and the law enforced from a broken tail light, broken windows standpoint, where every infraction you're going to get called on, you're going to have to pay the price, you accumulate a criminal record as a result. We don't need that kind of policing in our area. They certainly don't do that kind of policing in areas where white people live. Let's be clear about that. That does not happen on the north side. It should not happen on the south side. And so this means that all of these officers who've been trained in this kind of RoboCop style kick ass, take no prisoners, take names, and occupy the territory, and it's us against them. That whole mentality, along with the need to show production by coming back to the station when your shift ends with a handful of reports showing how you have arrested people, incited people. That style of policing, which only takes place in our neighborhood, has to change, and time for change is now.
Let me, sir, if I can get your thoughts on two important symbolic and practical issues. And this is according to an interview with the Washington Post. House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer saying that he will introduce a statehood bill that will be put to vote on June 26th. I wanted to get your reaction to that. Is it time for D.C. to become a state in this country? Would you support that measure?
Yes, and the fact that the president imposed his federal will on D.C. law enforcement 2 weeks ago, usurping the power of the mayor, that's beyond wrong to the citizens of Washington, D.C., which is where I'm from, by the way. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., and if I still lived there, I would not have a vote in Congress. We have, of course, Delegate Eleanor Holmes Norton, who has fought admirably to bring about equal rights for the people of Washington, D.C.
Right.
And it's time for statehood to come to Washington, D.C., and I'll be supporting Steny Hoyer's bill.
Yeah, that is set for June 26th, according to his interview with the Washington Post. And finally, sir, before I let you go, I want to ask you about a very important and a symbolic conversation taking place in this country. That is about a petition to rename Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, after Congressman John Lewis. It is getting a lot of traction. Obviously, one of the most iconic bridges in this country because of its history in the civil rights movement. Senator Doug Jones of Alabama telling us just in the last hour that he actually supports renaming the bridge, which, as you know, as well as some of our viewers may know, is dedicated to a Confederate general and a KKK leader, Ku Klux Klan leader. What is your reaction to this idea? Do you support the changing of that name on behalf of Congressman Lewis?
Yeah, it's a beautiful idea, and it's an idea whose time has come. And if we can't name the Edmund Pettus Bridge, rename it after John Lewis, who is the man that everything on that bridge should stand for about America, then America is not the America I believe it should be. So we need to go ahead and get that done quickly. It has to be done by the I don't know if it's a federal bridge or not. I would assume it's a state bridge. Probably has to be done by the Alabama state legislature. But Senator Doug Jones has got some legislation on it, and I'm going to be supportive.
All right, Congressman Hank Johnson there of Georgia. Sir, thank you so much for your time this morning. I appreciate it, as always.
Thank you.